what ultimately led to the downfall of Rome was their monetary protocol being compromised, right? It was the debasement of the coin, I think started with Nero, and eventually led to the forking into the East Roman Empire.
And,
So
and,
it's,
and their political protocols compromised.
yeah,
A series of civil wars, Caesar's being the most famous, but a series of civil wars where the political protocols broke down, even before the monetary protocols broke down. But you can see they're all related, right? At some point, the integrity of the society broke down, and when they lost their integrity across all these areas, the collapse of the political system begat the collapse of the military system.
The integrity of the society is broken down. Michael is talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. I hope that we can get some integrity back in our world before it's too late for us. Michael and Robert are discussing how to get people motivated to fight for a principle or even a country. Michael discusses Roman citizenship and how the Romans' grasp of technology, their military-industrial complex, and their reliance on protocols were a major advantage. The Romans were an engineering society, and their use of protocols is analogous to Bitcoin. Today's clip comes from the legendary series done by a legendary Robert Breedlove. He did a 12-part Rise of Man series with Michael. This is from the first episode that was uploaded in November of 2020. I spent a year teaching 8th grade American history. I couldn't take it. Our educational system is a failed system. Enjoy the clip.
Yeah. And that's what the Romans had in those 700 years, the height of the Republic. You're a Roman first. This year, maybe you're under the command of, your family's number one adversary. But next year, that'll be your command, right? And that's the Roman way. And there's a certain submission to nature and to the will. The organism is greater than any one individual, any one family, and it's continually refreshing itself. We have to have a constant flow of new talent, new leadership. Someone drops the baton, someone else picks up the baton. That's what made the Romans great. They suffered no kings among them.
Right.
You look at the Second Punic War, and then I think maybe it was the Second Macedonian War. Eventually, the Romans went to fight against, Philip of Macedon. He was a king, and he had an awful son, and his one son got fighting with his other son and convinced the father to murder the second son. And then the father realized that he made a mistake because his first son lied to him. And the father was a nutcase, crazy guy, and the son was kind of crazy, and it corrupted the entire society. And the Roman consul was just the most talented general, and he knew that, the way it worked is his officers were from every other competing family in Rome. If that general was lazy, drunk, cowardly, or stupid, it got reported back by the officer corps to Rome and to the Senate. And so they were slightly gossipy. But the point is, when you know that everybody's watching you and that you can be replaced and will be replaced next year and your future is uncertain, it brings out a higher degree of professionalism. And that's the competition in the market. Just like, you're a miner and they cut off your electricity while your mining rig stops and the mining shifts somewhere else.
Absolutely. That's the reason entrepreneurs in the free market are accountable to the preferences of their customers, right? Because they constantly face the existential threat of customers going elsewhere. Whereas the opposite would be true in a monopoly, right? The monopolist doesn't have to give two shits about his customers' preferences because they have no other choice. So I think that's really interesting.
So the Roman political system, it bred harder, stronger, faster, smarter individuals. And it was no apologies about it. From age 3, this is the way it is. and Rome comes first, and everybody else's interests are subjugated. And when you look at that, right, they started with that system, a good system. I mean, people forget about it. 700 years as a republic. I mean, find me another republic lasted 700 years, conquered the entire known world. Then you've got the Roman army, and that tells a different story. I mean, the Roman army it takes us back to this issue of there was never such thing as a fair fight. The Romans weren't fighting fair. They would have laughed at you. You know, like the Roman approach to this was to take, my illustration of the slinger on the cliff and take it to a whole new level. The Romans manufactured, ballista, and they manufactured catapults, and they manufactured every sword to be the same length, every shield to be the same size, every soldier took the same step, the same length. Everything was the same. You could be an 8-foot tall Goliath, and the Roman 5-foot 10-inch tall normal dude, right, is going to beat the crap out of you because you're not going to get within 12 feet of him because you're going to take a spear in the gut from the 12 guys standing to his left and his right as you charge. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right? There's no in all of these time periods, all these wars, and you read Livy and he describes them very in depth over and over again. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of battles, and they always consisted of the Romans maneuvered to get the high ground. The Romans maneuvered to get the enemy out on the plain. The Romans unleashed the artillery onto the enemy while they stood and obliterated 10% of them. Then the Romans unleashed some more artillery. There's one story where the Roman army cornered the Gauls. The Gauls are on a mountaintop, on a hillside, and the Romans are below. They just surround them. They stop. They start to pummel them, and they rain down hell from above, bullets, boulders, flame, napalm, and Livy writes, before a Roman even took a step toward the enemy line, half of the Gauls were dead, and 80% of them had been maimed or incapacitated from the bullets.
Wow.
And then the Romans start to move up and do something. It's like this. There's none of this. Let's just charge into battle and fight it out with our sword, right? Never happened that way. It was always going to be find a way to get an advantage. And by the way, the technology is very critical, right? People think like the Romans had a military industrial complex, right? There's a way to do it. You're going to do it in a certain way. They had an entire body language, an entire system of how you're going to act. And, if you want something which is eye-opening, there's this story of the Roman Navy from the First Punic War. The Carthaginians dominate the Mediterranean. The Romans are a land power. The Romans don't know anything about naval power, but it tells you a lot about the Roman psyche and the Roman intellect. The Romans are getting beat up by the Carthaginians because the Carthaginians control the ports and they have the fleet. The Romans have no fleet. One day, a storm kicks up, and the storm drives a Carthaginian naval ship, into a Roman port. It's blown into the port by a bad mistral. The Romans capture it. They take it apart to try to figure out how the Carthaginians make their ships. And you can't make this up. This is the most amazing thing in history. They find out that the Carthaginians make their ships from a kit, from reusable standardized parts. And not only are all the parts standardized, the Carthaginians have labeled each part with the instructions of where it fits and the number of the part. The Romans deconstruct the entire thing, steal the entire blueprint. 90 days later, they made 150 ships. You think these guys are screwing around, right? They're not screwing around. It's like everybody everybody thinks, oh yeah, well, yeah, I'm going to take my time to figure this stuff out. No, war has a way. War has a way of quickening your time, your activity. Bam, I'm losing. I find a ship. That's the DNA. That's the formula of the ship. 150 ships. To make a long story short, the Romans win the First Punic War and they vanquish the Carthaginians and they become the naval power. And of course, it's not that the Romans invented everything. It's just the Romans stole every good idea from every civilization, from the Greeks, from the Carthaginians, from the whatever that they crushed. And because they lasted, we're able to read their histories. But,
Right.
it kind of blows your mind when you think that in 500, by the way, you think the Carthaginians invented that? Maybe they stole it from the Phoenicians.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, 500 BC, if you want to win wars, you don't just make ships and you don't just train hard and you don't make wagons, right? Roman roads. The Romans had standardized parts, a standardized gauge for a wagon wheel. Every Roman wagon rolling on the road is carving ruts in the road. That gauge has to be standardized. You can't just make any wagon. You have to make it exactly the same.
Right.
Okay. This is for all those people that believe, that recoil in standardization. Well, that Roman wagon gauge eventually became the standard width of a railroad track in Europe, and then eventually the standard width of a railroad track everywhere. So if you want to know how wide a Roman chariot was, or war chariot, or any chariot, just go stand on a railroad anywhere on earth. The Romans gave that to you. And the reason why they did it that way is because if you build wagons with different gauges, they fall in the rut, they snap the axle, and that's death.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, it's like Henry Ford said, you can have it any color as long as it's black. No, you can't have it any way you want it. You take it, what you can. By the way, it's not that every civilization figured this out. It's just that every civilization that insisted upon doing it a different way with different bells and whistles got crushed to death.
Right.
And there's an analogy to this in the Bitcoin world too. When you come up with a different feature and it's like, it would just be 10% better. If you made your wagon 10% wider, it would hold 20% more and you would need 10% less and your transaction costs would be less and your whatever.
Yeah. I think it's
better.
It points towards path dependence too, right? Like the fact that a technology already took a certain path, it kind of has an inertia, right? An inertia that's carried the width of the gauge of a wagon wheel to the width of a modern rail. And I thought it was interesting too how you pointed to the civilizations that won out, the Romans or the Carthaginians, are the ones that studied their history, right? So they're actually gleaning insights from civilizations that had come before them, which again is kind of harkens back to that Yuval Harari concept of our ability to abstract our learnings into symbols like language and whatnot, and then pass them from generation to generation, such that the most successful strategies take advantage of the collective learnings up until that point. Versus trying to just do something from scratch on your own. Like we all stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak.
Those roads were the logistics network of the Roman Empire. And if you can move goods and services, if you can move armies faster inside your borders, then your enemies can move inside their borders, right? Then you're going to win, right? You've got a major advantage. And of course, if everybody lays down a railroad track that's a certain width, and you come up with an idea for a car that's got a different width, who are you going to sell it to?
Right.
Right. People talk about protocols being important, right? Well, the TCP/IP wasn't the first protocol. Roman roads probably weren't the first protocol either. But the point is, protocols matter, and it's arrogant But I'm sure that the Egyptians had protocols to build those pyramids, standard size and standard widths and standard weights and measures. Those protocols matter a heck of a lot. And if you don't have them, it's impossible for people to cooperate. So money, we've talked about money a lot as being essential for civilization to cooperate and allowing us to specialize. But all these other logistics protocols or military protocols are in their own way equally important. And I'll make one last point on just Roman engineering and aqueducts, right? The Romans understood the importance of hydraulics, and they took it to a new level. They actually created aqueducts that would bring water from up to 70 miles away to a given city. But a lot of coastal towns on the Med that are not inhabitable. I mean, the natural economic density is really a function of the amount of water per year. So if the amount of water per year is based on rainwater, maybe you can have 500 people live in the city. And if you bring the aqueduct, it goes to 5,000 or 50,000. And so the economic density requires the hydraulic flow for sanitation and just to keep everybody alive. And so engineering the roads, engineering the aqueducts, it's the rails upon which the entire Iron Age civilization was built. And Romans, if anything, they're engineers. And they elevated engineering above all. And what is engineering? I mean, I'm an engineer. I think engineering is an incredibly honorable, ethical, life-affirming profession. That the basic credo of the engineer is, I look at nature and I look at the circumstances that I'm surrounded by, and I use my intellect and every material and technique at hand in order to construct a better world for everyone and everything that I love. That's the credo. I'm not going to be a victim of circumstance.